Hi, I'm Lesli Bisgould, and I'm going to talk about language in the context of animal advocacy. I'm a lawyer in Toronto. I've been a lawyer for the last 30 years, and 10 of those years I spent working in animal rights law. As individuals, one of the most important things we do is choose words to represent our ideas. And our sophisticated ability to communicate is one of the factors in our success as a human animal. So I don't believe in language police. I don't think we should be told what to say or how to say it. I do believe that as advocates who care about the pain and suffering that we cause one another, we're well advised to carefully consider the implications, both intended and unintended, of our linguistic choices. And to be aware, what am I conveying when I say these words? So with that in mind, I invite you to consider some of the implications of our linguistic choices that I've observed over the years. And I hope you'll consider them when choosing your words in this realm. So the first general observation I want to make is one that many others have made over the years, which is how we use comparisons to animals as a way of insulting one another. Without ever directly having to say that to be a non-human animal is to be lesser, we say so indirectly all of the time. So for example, who wants to be compared to a rat, a pig, a dog, a bird brain, an ass, a chicken, a cow, an animal? We don't have to perpetuate these inaccurate and negative connotations. We are creative enough to choose other devices if we find we must insult one another. Another general way we convey that animals are lesser creatures is by objectifying them and calling them it. There's no reason we can't call animals he, she, they, them, just as we do in the human context, and attribute them some individual identity, just as we do in the human context. When we refer to an animal as it, we convey subtly, indirectly, that the animal is not an individual, has no individual identity, is not even really a creature meriting moral consideration, but is just a thing, an object, or to use a term that we use commonly now when we're talking about animals and their rights, property. Many people are starting to recognize that this is the blunt categorical distinction that our laws tend to make between humans and non-human animals, and do so to justify and perpetuate their exclusion from the world of legal rights, and really, in fact, exclude them from even meaningful legal consideration of any kind. Our legal system is largely, not entirely, comprised of beings, on the one hand, who have rights, and things, on the other hand, that are the object of those rights. We have property and property owners. Well, why would we, the advocates for animals, want to perpetuate that distinction, even subtly, with our choice of words? Let's talk about animals as somebody, as opposed to something, as who, as opposed to that. Let's speak of ourselves, not as the owners of animals, but as their guardians or companions. Let's ask ourselves, if we're in a situation and we're not quite sure what to do, if there were a human in this sentence instead of an animal, which words would I choose? And is there a morally relevant reason for choosing differently when we substitute an animal for the human? One popular word choice I find particularly vexing in this context is the word cruelty. It is very common for critics of animal exploitation to use that word to describe the act they criticize. And I mean no criticism of individuals who choose that in raising this concern, but I'm putting this out here as food for thought, since that is what I'm doing in this video. So we hear, the seal hunt is cruel, battery cages are cruel, toxicity testing on animals is cruel. In fact, cruelty to animals is the title of the section of our criminal code that contains the criminal laws against harming animals. So it's ubiquitous. It's understandable that we, without thinking, adopt that terminology. The problem with that terminology, in my respectful opinion, is that it connotes an intention, doesn't it? Doesn't cruelty suggest bad intent, malevolent intent, evil intent? It's an intention that first of all is rarely true, and even if it were true, would be irrelevant. Moreover, it sets the bar much higher than it has to be when we are criticizing particular behavior. Cruelty, my friends, is a state of mind. It suggests that a person engaged in an act of hurting an animal because they want the animal to suffer. Now, that may be true in the individual acts of violence that we read about from time to time in the media, but it's not necessarily true in the context of the systemic forms of exploitation by which the overwhelming majority of animals are hurt in our society, And our reliance on that word helps keep the focus on the intent of the actor, rather than, where I think we all agree it should be, on the impact on the victim. Focus on intent also helps to excuse the behavior, because if we can excuse the intent, if there's a noble intent like curing cancer, feeding hungry people, it makes it a little bit easier to try and look away from the ugly steps we have to take to get there. Animal experimenters do not wake up in the morning imagining all the different ways they can go to work and hurt animals. They may be, because of their jobs or in the course of their jobs, desensitized, callous. They may be willfully blind. They may be ego-driven. They may be desperate to find a vaccine. So calling them cruel can only backfire. Imputing bad intent to the people we count on to cure our diseases and feed us only hurts us. Why would we set ourselves up to have to prove somebody's bad intent? What do we stand to gain? Seal hunters, for example, cause agony to thousands of seals on Canada's east coast when they hunt them every spring. But they don't do it because they love hurting seals. They're trying to feed their families. And seal hunting is dirty, dangerous, cold, miserable work. Seal hunters hate doing it, and they, for that reason, are the heroes of their communities. If we insist on labeling them as cruel, we make our own jobs in trying to discuss the activities that we condemn in a reasonable way and in trying to make any positive change. We're making our own jobs harder. I also find it pretty hard to believe that the animals suffering at the other end of human actions care much about that intent either, be it noble, be it ignoble. Intent, frankly, doesn't matter in this context. What matters is the effect of our behavior on its victim, the consequences of the behavior, whether intended or not. And I want to stress that that is a really important feature of human rights law, at least in Canada. Intent is irrelevant. So if somebody means well and engages in behavior that directly or indirectly has a discriminatory impact on the groups that our human rights legislation protects, then that's a violation of human rights law. And I would suggest that animal rights law should be cultivating the same focus. Let us speak of violence, exploitation, degradation, pain, suffering. Let us focus on the impact on the animals and stop kicking ourselves in our own campaigns by setting the bar much higher than it has to be. There's so much more to say on this topic. I obviously can't get into all of it in this short video, but I thought I would just try to encourage you to pause, think about the implications of your word choices as you proceed. So for example, are animals really voiceless, or are we deliberately finding reasons to ignore their voices? We don't have to let old social norms dictate our choices. And we certainly don't have to let industry lobby groups dictate them either. So I'm going to close with two examples of what I mean by that. First, animal exploiters deliberately choose terminology that transforms animals from individuals whose interests we might be concerned about and pay attention to products they want to sell. So they choose language that takes the focus off the animals themselves and reinforces our preferences in using them. So we hear terms like poultry, waterfowl, specimens. We don't need to use this language. Second, animal exploiters also choose words that disguise the violence they are committing. So instead of hunting, trapping, killing, they say harvesting, as though when you remove a coyote's fur to trim your coat, it's just going to grow back next year. Instead of shooting, gassing, killing, they say euthanize. Euthanasia is a term properly used when someone's life is being ended for that individual's own sake, right? Isn't it? To end her suffering for her own good, not as an economical solution to problems that we didn't bother to solve responsibly, not because it's cheaper and easier to kill an animal than to find her a home. So I could go on all day, but I won't. I hope these thoughts are helpful, and I thank you very much for listening.